Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the New Year, New Language Summit. In this session, I'm happy to present Lindsay Dow from Lindsay Does Languages. She's a language consultant and coach, and she holds a master's degree in applied linguistics. In this session, she's going to be talking about language shame and how we can move past it for efficient language learning. So take it away, Lindsay.
Hello and welcome to New Year, New Language 2025. My name is Lindsay of Lindsay Does Languages, and I'm going to talk to you about shame. Yes, that fun topic that we all love to talk so much about. But that is kind of the reason why we need to be here talking about it today, because we don't talk about it enough. So, in more specific terms, I'm going to talk about how to move past shame for confident language learning, which is, pretty important with the loose theme of this year being steady. So just in case this is the first time we're meeting, hello, my name is Lindsay, and I'm on a mission to teach as many people as possible how to learn a language. I've been doing this a while myself, over 2 decades now, in all sorts of environments and scenarios, from school to higher education to self-study to immersion, all of the ways. I've probably tried it. And in all of that time, I have studied for both my degrees as well, BA Modern Language Studies, MA in Applied Linguistics, both distance learning, both time, which has really taught me a lot about how self-study works and how we can stay motivated when learning things ourselves as well. So a lot of that stuff then really kind of seeps into my own language learning, into everything that I share as well with you. Now, you may have seen me around. I've been featured in The Guardian, BBC Ideas, italki, Memrise, tons of podcasts, conversations in Spanish, fluent in 3 months, just to name two. So yeah, if you're like, oh, it's familiar, maybe, maybe you've seen me around before. So let's get into this then. What about your languages makes you feel shame? Is there something specific for you where it's like, I just can't speak. I feel so embarrassed about speaking, and then I feel ashamed that I feel embarrassed about speaking? Or is it something else? Is it that you really struggle to learn vocabulary and you feel like, I don't know enough words? That makes me feel shame. Like, there's all sorts of ways that this can show up. So have a think for yourself about what this looks like for you. If anything, if there's nothing, then great, you're okay, right? But still stay with this, because it is something that can crop up at any time, that can, surprise us sometimes in terms of, I'm feeling shame about that. I had no idea, right? So it's also always worth having this understanding, so that if this does ever come up for you, okay, I know how to handle this. But what does make you feel shame about your languages? Now, in the words of Dr. Brene Brown, it's worth distinguishing this. Shame is I am bad. Guilt is I did something bad. So we have that distinction there of guilt being connected very much to often like one particular action that we have done, that we feel, oh, I shouldn't have done that one thing. I did something bad. Whereas shame shows up as I am bad. Oy, that's obviously not what we want when we're trying to learn a language and trying to continually work through and get better at something. If this is what we're feeling, it ain't going to be too productive, right? So that's because shame affects how we show up. So to go deeper with one of those examples, you're ashamed that you don't know more vocab. And then you avoid learning more because you think you're going to do it wrong. And then you still don't know more words, so the shame grows. And then you postpone lessons and meetups until you know more. And then you're ashamed for not practicing enough. And then you wonder if you should stop trying at languages completely. So it is very much this spiral that just descends and descends and descends. One thing just leads to another. And that then affects how we show up in the learning of languages. Not just, oh, I've reached the end, I feel confident at speaking, because first of all, there is no end with languages. But second of all, we really need to focus a lot on the process as well as just that end result. And if in that process, this is where we're at, and we're feeling anything along these lines, and it's spiraling down, it isn't going to go too well. So becoming a neutral observer helps to spot the signs of shame. Now, a neutral observer is something I talk about a lot in Language Life, my program where I work with people the most, and or online in general. Like you probably might have heard me say, become a neutral observer, because this is so important. And it beyond just helping to spot the signs of shame. But really what I mean by that is that you're able to have this sense of almost detachment from yourself. So you're able to observe what you're doing in your languages without connecting that to you as a person and affecting how you feel about yourself as a person. Does that make sense? It's a big skill to develop, hence why we work on it in the program, because it's something that can take a bit of time. It's not like this instant, become a neutral observer. Okay, yes, I will do that. And so when you do this, one of the side effects of that is that you are able to then spot the signs of shame a little bit better. So what are those signs of shame? Well, there are many physical, emotional, and social signs, but these are the big three. This is what we'll talk about: negative self-talk, withdrawal, and perfectionism. So negative self-talk, then, this is when you find yourself saying things like, I'm not a language person. I can't conjugate verbs at all. I'm useless at studying. I don't have what it takes to remember vocab. I should be doing more. And these sorts of things could be stemming back to shame when we say these things to ourselves. Withdrawal. So this is when perhaps in our scenario, you're avoiding social situations where you might be speaking the language. So maybe you sign up for a local meetup with good intentions and you think, yeah, I'm going to go. It comes on to the day and you think, well, it's been a long, busy day. I'm a bit hungry. I'll have dinner first and then see how I feel. Oh, and now I've sat down. I'm much more relaxed and comfortable here. And really, what you're doing there is perhaps avoiding it because you're thinking, I'm going to have to speak if I go there. I'm not ready to speak, right? So you end up withdrawing. You're isolating yourself in your learning itself. So I'm a big advocate for self-study, for independent learning. That does not mean that you study alone. So there are bound to be people, various people, within that language learning process. So self-study is not the same as alone. And that might be that you are working with a teacher, an exchange partner, a meetup perhaps. Maybe there's people in your life that speak that language. But when you fully close in and you withdraw on that, it could well be a sign of shame. It could well be that you're thinking, oh, I'm not ready to speak with these people in my life that I love in their mother tongue. So I'm just going to learn until I'm ready to speak, right? And it can also mean reverting to your native language. So if you do end up in those situations where you might be speaking, rather than attempting to speak because you feel shame around that, you just revert into English. So all sorts of reasons, all sorts of ways this can show up in terms of withdrawal. And then perfectionism. So a lot of people that I work with in language life would claim the label recovering perfectionist for themselves. This comes up a lot. This is a running theme and it's very understandable. But what that means is that if you are still striving for that perfection, you're never going to reach your expectations, right? So you have this constant feeling of chasing more, and it's never going to be enough. So you think, well, I need to get better. So you're overly worried about mistakes. So you over prepare, right? It just isn't good. So shame can lead to all of these things growing and growing and growing. So if you notice, any of these things that I've just mentioned here, and you're like, oh yeah, I say that to myself, or I do that, or I find myself, constantly feeling of chasing more. Like, this could be something that is very relevant to you right now where you're at. So once you've then noticed shame, what do we do in terms of being able to overcome this? Now, I really want to emphasize this word overcome. We're not talking about avoiding shame in the first place. We're not talking about completely like quashing it down and never ever feeling it again, because every feeling, every emotion is useful. Even the ones like shame that don't necessarily feel good, they're still useful. It's still our mind, our body trying to tell us something about what we're doing, right? And maybe that's an indicator for change. So when we feel shame, like I said, not a very productive environment for continuing our language learning, but that doesn't mean that we never want to ever feel it again, because it will perhaps come up from time to time. And it's about instead letting it come up and knowing how to overcome it rather than how to attempt to fully just wash it down and ignore it forever, right? That's not great. So, first thing, and probably the most important thing here, is be vulnerable. This is what it all comes down to. Now, it is important to mention that you are already being incredibly vulnerable when you speak another language. Incredibly vulnerable. The fact that you are willing to go into spaces that perhaps are not typically yours by default, that you are willing to attempt to enter those spaces, to speak someone else's language, and like that in itself is vulnerable, and to speak it imperfectly. It's huge. It's one of the biggest acts of vulnerability. But we do need to lean into that a little bit more. Like, oh yeah, right, but it's okay. So to move past shame, we do need to be more vulnerable because vulnerability is strength. Vulnerability is not weakness. And this is a big misconception and a big reason why so many people just avoid the topic of shame and avoid thinking about vulnerability because we think, oh, to be vulnerable is to be weak. No, vulnerability is strength. So have a think back to any moments of vulnerability that you've had in your life, or consider ones that maybe haven't happened but replay on loop, those moments where you do sort of feel imaginary shame, right, in imaginary conversations that haven't really happened but they keep coming back. So think through those moments and think, okay, right, why does that feel vulnerable? Like, how can I find strength in that? And then finish this sentence. Vulnerability for me is strength, first of all. But then what else? What does it mean to be vulnerable? And like I say, it's not weakness. So what is the opposite of that when you think about these moments where you have been vulnerable, or, ones that haven't happened but are there still? What does it mean? And how can we finish this sentence for you? You should do vulnerable. So back to Brene Brown says, you either do vulnerability willingly or vulnerability does you. And when vulnerability does you, that's going to hit you 10 times harder. It's going to be way more uncomfortable and you're going to be less in control of that. So when you do vulnerability willingly, when you encourage yourself to be more vulnerable, you're more in control of how that's going to go, right? Not fully, of course, because we never are fully in control of anything really in life, but you have more control over what's going to happen and how it's going to go. And part of the reason why this is so important as well is that you really want to get comfortable with the discomfort of being vulnerable. It's not necessarily always going to feel nice and to make you feel calm and relaxed and what a great day, I was so vulnerable, oh, how lovely. No, there'll be moments where it is uncomfortable, but it gets less uncomfortable the more vulnerable you are, right? So really don't rush to fix vulnerability. Just notice how it feels. Again, become a neutral observer of this. This is another kind of feeling and emotion where you want to be good at like feeling like, oh, I'm feeling vulnerable. Why is that? I always say as well in language life, it's like curiosity, not critique, is what you're going for here. So rather than I feel vulnerable again. What an absolute idiot I am. Why do I feel so vulnerable? Why can't I just speak this language? No. That is not going to help you. Instead, like, oh, I'm feeling vulnerable. Why is that? I'm curious. I wonder, right? And let that lead you down a path of inquiry rather than a path of, that shame spiral that we saw earlier. So don't rush to fix it. Just noticing how it feels so that you're able to find comfort in that discomfort of it. And vulnerability as well is not oversharing. So vulnerability, being vulnerable, does not mean, okay, I need to tell Facebook everything. I need to share all my moments in my life that make me feel vulnerable straight away on social media. No, that's not vulnerability necessarily, right? So it's about really considering the intention before sharing. Are you sharing with someone that you trust? Is this, what is it that you want from sharing this? And that moment there just helps you to Avoid kind of going into oversharing and then feeling discomfort with that and feeling shame for oversharing, and recognizing, okay, actually, this is vulnerability. This is important. My intention is good here, and I'm sharing with someone I trust. Verbalize it. So shame gets embarrassed when you talk about it, and it shrinks. This is good. This is very, very good news. It's like, if we're thinking about vulnerability and we're thinking about talking about shame and saying, I felt really ashamed about this thing, just saying that in itself is good and is going to help to shrink that shame. We can laugh at it, we can notice it, we can question it, but don't shame yourself for shame. Again, we're back in the shame spiral. If we do that, you feel shame, so you feel ashamed for feeling shame, and then you feel ashamed for feeling shame or feeling, no, we don't want that. So even if this is, when I say verbalize it, right, I'm not necessarily talking about sharing it all on social media or saying everything that you feel to everyone in your life all of the time. Not necessarily, if that feels very uncomfortable right now. We want to sort of bridge towards these things. So even just writing in a private journal or speaking aloud quietly at home or when you're out on a walk could help. Talking to strangers, like, how much easier is it to tell a stranger at a bus stop something that's going on in your life than, something quite personal sometimes, than someone who you're really close to? Sometimes it's much easier to have those conversations with people that don't know us as well and that we know we're never going to see again. So think about verbalizing it and how that could look like for you in a way that feels good and will still help the shame shrink. So some examples of that then. Laugh at it. So, can you believe I'm embarrassed to speak with locals? Right? Taking that angle just lets people know that you're speaking with how you want them to interpret what you're saying, right? So, can you believe I'm embarrassed? They're going to then want to have this back and forth, maybe a bit of laughter with you about it, right? Notice it. I avoid speaking with the locals. It's interesting. I wonder why that is. This is the curiosity, not critique, that we're talking about. And question it. What do I gain from not speaking with the locals? Why don't I do it? So laugh at it, notice it, question it. These different approaches are going to work differently for different people at different stages in your language, when you're feeling different levels of shame, different amounts of shame. So really knowing the spectrum, if you like, of all of these options of how this can work helps you to be able to pick the right one in the right moment as best as possible. Sometimes something will just come. You'll just be questioning and you're like, I could be laughing at this. But at least then you know that that's an option. Visualize the opposite. So what does it feel like to not experience this shame? Can you visualize that opposite? And when you do, think about then making that opposite scenario be a goal, if that helps. So you imagine right now that you're going to walk into the meetup that you had on the calendar, but you actually decided, no, I'm not going to do that. It's been a long day, and you sort of withdrew from, right? The example we gave earlier. What about if you imagine that you don't experience this shame? You're not feeling ashamed of speaking. You show up to the meetup, you chat with everyone, and you make people laugh, and maybe you make some friends, and you're looking forward to going back the next time. That's the opposite, right? That's the opposite scenario. That's kind of what you want to happen. So then what about if you make that the goal? And when you then make that opposite scenario the goal, you can think, okay, well, how do I get from here to there? What do I need to do to make that an actual reality rather than just the opposite of shame? So perhaps what that means is, if you want to be able to walk into that space and feel more confident and be able to speak, make people laugh, make friends, it means that you need to get better at speaking solo. So maybe you develop a solo speaking habit. So when you're practicing your speaking, you're not always waiting for someone else to be available so you can practice your speaking together with someone. No, instead, you're getting some practice in when you're on your own, as and when you want to, because you're always with yourself. So you can always do this at any point, right? So a solo speaking habit is a great way to help to bridge, to be able to then get to that point where that opposite actually becomes a reality. So here's what that looks like. So with the shame, You might be avoiding speaking, telling yourself that you need to do more, not talking to your friends about languages, feeling demotivated. But without the shame, the opposite of those moments, if you avoid speaking, the opposite of that is that you're openly speaking when you're ready. You tell yourself you need to do more. Positive affirmations on your wall, on your phone lock screen. This is a super small, very simple thing, but it can have a big impact because you're looking at these places multiple times a day. Eventually, that's going to seep in, and you'll start to believe that more than telling yourself you need to do more. Not talking to your friends, not talking about your languages with friends, sorry, sharing how it's going with no worry of backlash. So really questioning, like, well, what am I worried about? What do I think they're going to say if I say, oh, you know what, it's really tough right now learning Japanese. I'm really stuck. I wonder if I should give up. Are they really going to say, yeah, you probably should. I'd give up if I were you. Or are they going to say, oh no, don't give up, you were doing so well, and like you really wanted to go and travel to Japan, etc., right? So when you're sharing with no worry of backlash, that even if they do say, yeah, you probably should give up, then you think, okay, well, that's just your opinion, I have mine, right? Feeling demotivated or without the shame here, this is lasting motivation. It's obviously a big change. This last one, this is just an example of how some of them might be quite sort of small, simple fixes that we can do, like the positive affirmations, and some of them are going to be big shifts that occur. Be self-compassionate. It's the first lesson in language life because it is so important. It is the foundation of everything that you do. If you go in lacking self-compassion when you're learning a language, you're going to be so harsh on yourself, and it's going to be very, very unproductive. You're going to burn out. You're going to feel demotivated. It might not happen right away. You might be someone who really chugs along for a long time with that attitude, with that approach. But eventually, the burnout will come, and you will think, oh, okay, this isn't me. I need a different approach. So you may as well start being self-compassionate now. It's not going to hurt. It's going to do much more good. Now, self-compassion, according to Dr. Kristen Neff, we've got 3 components here: self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. So the default assumption tends to be that self-compassion is just self-kindness, that it is just being soft to ourselves. Oh, did great, even though it was really horrible and you didn't say a word, like, oh, well done, well done. It's not that. That's not what it is. Self-kindness is a part of self-compassion. And self-kindness isn't even that, like, oh, no, soft, soft, soft. No, it's just being generally kind to yourself in the same way you would talk to a friend. So if your friend says, oh, I'm struggling with my German, I can't say a word right now. Again, you're not going to say, oh, you suck. You're going to say, oh, don't worry, is there anything I can do to help? And I'm sure you're doing great and you've put in lots of work, blah, blah, blah. You're kind to them. Be kind to yourself. Talk to yourself in the way you would talk to a friend, because you kind of are your own best friend. You are the person you're going to spend the most time with in your life. Common humanity. So this is recognizing that what you are going through is not unique. We have this common humanity whereby, you are not the first person to struggle with the subjunctive in Spanish. Other people have been there too. This is a shared experience. And that really helps just to avoid falling into that isolation of like, I'm so ashamed that I am the only person in the whole world that struggles with the subjunctive in Spanish. No, common humanity, lots of people do, right? And mindfulness, a big buzzword in recent years, but really all this means is that you are able to be present in the now, in the moment. Far too often we are perhaps feeling down about the past, or we're feeling anxious about the future, right? We're often thinking behind us, we're thinking ahead, we're not thinking about where we are. So self-compassion is composed of all 3 of these working together. And again, it's a big thing to develop that doesn't happen just overnight, hence why this is something that I work on with people a lot. Gradual progress. So something that can be really bad for shame, if you're feeling a bit of shame, we'll use speaking because it's a good example, right? If you're feeling like this lack of speaking confidence, the default advice of just speak more right now, go, do it, speak, 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 isn't going to help. Because then what's going to happen is you feel ashamed that you don't know enough vocabulary, you can't speak well enough. But then you think, okay, well, I just need to speak more, speak more, speak more, go, go, go. So you sign up to go to the meetup, you go to the meetup, and surprise, surprise, you can't say anything, right? So then you feel more shame that you went there, you embarrassed yourself in your thoughts, not necessarily, but in your mind, you embarrassed yourself because you couldn't speak, and now you feel that you can't go back. So you feel like you've blocked off this opportunity for speaking practice. Right? Well, actually, what was missing there was this gradual progress. We went from here to here with nothing in between. So, the way that we can help to overcome shame with this is to start speaking and writing in safe environments first. Writing gently, speaking gently. Do not feel pressured to instantly go out and sign up for every meetup and just speak more right now. Decide what feels comfortable yet rewarding, just steps for doing more piece by piece. So here's what this might look like. Again, if you feel shame when speaking, step one would be to speak something that someone else wrote aloud. So when we're speaking, we have this process, we have these 3 stages that we are thinking of what to say, how to say it, and then we're saying it, right? If we do this, first of all, we are eliminating the what to say as best as possible. So we can focus on those last 2 stages of thinking, well, how am I going to say these words? And then we're saying them, right? So if we take out one stage of the speaking process, we're going to really be helping ourselves to focus on the others, have less to focus on overall, and just be able to okay, go into it. And because someone else has written something, like a Wikipedia page, for example, we're not necessarily needing to worry, like, have I written this correct? Have I done this correct, right? Step 2 would then be to introduce yourself. So speak something that you've written aloud. So bring you back into it. So we're still helping to just, in the moment of speaking, put down the idea of what to say. You're preparing that first of all, but you are preparing it, not what someone else has written now. Step 3, speak something that you have bullet points for aloud. So now, we're not just going from, okay, I've written something, I'm now going to speak this aloud, to, and speak spontaneously. We have this step of, okay, well, roughly what do I want to say? I want to talk about this and this and this. We don't need to write the whole thing out, but just having some bullet points to help sort of scaffold your way there is another step. To then, step 4, speaking something that you have no prep for aloud, right? And there's other little bridges we can add in between each of these steps before step 1 as well. But this is a kind of broad way that works for a lot of people. So speak something someone else wrote aloud, speak something you wrote aloud, speak something you have bullet points for, and then no prep. Another example, if you are ashamed at not doing enough, quote unquote, because what does enough really mean, right? Step 1 here would be to adjust your expectations of what counts. So if you're thinking that it only counts when, let's take speaking again. If you're thinking speaking only counts when you are in a lesson, in a meetup, with someone in front of you, live, face to face, then when you have an online lesson and it's not face to face, in your head, that doesn't count. When you speak to yourself for your practice and your solo speaking habit, in your head, it doesn't count. So we need to adjust your expectation of what counts, first of all, because chances are you're doing more than you give yourself credit for. Step 2 is just to start small. Listen to one song, do one app lesson, write one sentence. Just really start small with this. Step 3 is to explore expanding those things when it feels stable. So when you do think about just doing one thing, let's say it's one app lesson, right? One session on Duolingo. And you do that and you think, okay, for today, that's enough. For like a week, maybe that feels good. And then you think, okay, how can I expand this? So maybe you do the session, but you say things aloud, or you do the session and you write down each phrase or each sentence as it comes up. Or you do the session and then at the end you think, okay, what did I remember that I just learned in that little session, right? So you just various ways that you can expand these simple activities when things are already feeling steady. And then step 4, develop a realistic set of goals that fits with what you now know you can do. So we're just, again, building up gently. And like I say, there's other ways we can just bridge between these steps. There's things we can do first if we need to, but this is a broad overview of what this might look like. Ask for help. Sometimes we attach shame and judgment to asking for help, that it would be shameful to admit that we need help with something. And again, various ways this can show up, whether it's asking your partner to help you find time to study, seeking out a language coach, all of this can feel vulnerable. So we don't want to do it sometimes. But we can't move past shame until we acknowledge that we, as individuals, do not have all the answers. So asking for help, again, not a sign of weakness, a sign of strength. What does this look like? With yourself. It starts with you, and then it's like this ripple effect into the world around you and the people around you. You have to start with you. First of all, acknowledging that you don't have all the answers and acknowledging that that is not weakness. That is step 1. Then with your close circle, that might look like asking for time and space to study, asking for support and motivation, asking for translations if they speak the language. So let's say that you and your partner are raising a child together and you find that in the evenings, it's really difficult for you to get some language time. So you ask if perhaps they could take care of childcare to give you a little bit of space and time to study in the evening, right? Various ways this might show up. With teachers and coaches, simply signing up for a lesson, a course, a program, an event like this is an act of vulnerability, admitting, yeah, okay, I'm happy to accept help. Asking for help when you don't understand. How many times, I'm raising my hand on this, have you sat in a lesson and the teacher says, all good, you understand? And you go, yep. And there's maybe something that could do with a little bit of further explanation. So really just being open to say, actually, no, what does this mean? Asking for help when you don't understand, not a sign of shame. And with the world. So when you're out in the big wide world, speaking with real people, IRL, and real life scenarios, repeat, slower, right, asking for clarification, not a sign of weakness. You have not failed. You are not fluent or anything like that if you need to ask someone to repeat or to say something slower or to write something down. Or if you need to use Google Translate, that's okay too. Asking for patience, even if this is indirect, this is all okay. So there's a lot in this session. This might be something that you revisit, right? That you kind of note everything down. But I want you to just pick one thing to start off from this session. Focus on that and be more vulnerable today with just that one thing. So if you're thinking, I'm stuck in a shame spiral unless I change everything about who I am. No, that's not it. I have the knowledge I need to move past shame and confidently learn languages. So to sum up, shame, I am bad, versus guilt, I did something bad. Becoming a neutral observer helps to spot the signs of shame without judgment. Signs of shame include negative self-talk, withdrawal, perfectionism. Vulnerability is the key to quashing shame. Vulnerability is strength, not weakness. You should do vulnerability so it doesn't do you. Vulnerability isn't oversharing. Shame hates to be spoken aloud, so verbalizing shame is key. Visualize the opposite to give yourself a model of what shame-free language looks like for you. Gradual progress. There's no pressure to speak in front of strangers today. Ask for help without shame and judgment. Now, if you want to finally learn that language in 2025 at a steady pace that suits you to build something sustainable for the long term, I've made you an extra bonus video training. You can get it at lindsaydoeslanguages.com/NYNL bonus. And yeah, that bonus video training, how to finally learn that language in 2025. We're going to go deeper into some of my core principles on language learning and how it all works. And yeah, it's going to be really, really helpful for you. If you've enjoyed this, you're definitely going to enjoy that. lindsaydoeslanguages.com/NYNL bonus. And I'll see you there. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the event.